Fortunately, because it is an emotional type of trauma, it is something that can be healed, but it's not going to be healed by just forgetting about it. It's not going to be healed by just having 1 or 2 conversations about it. It takes a long time, and it takes a few phases. I shouldn't say a few phases. There's 2 phases, and then there's a few elements that have to be touched on throughout the process. So I'm going to get into that now. The first thing, obviously, when you find out that your spouse has betrayed you, is genuine remorse. Now, usually this will happen, but sometimes it won't. Sometimes there will be defensiveness, sometimes there will be anger, or sometimes there will be fake remorse. Sometimes there will be remorse that you're just not truly believing. So it has to be the remorse where you really feel like your spouse understands, not just that what they did was, against the rules and they, that it was wrong, but that they recognize the impact that it had on you, that they feel pain and remorse for the pain that they caused you, right? No excuses, no justifications, no putting it back on you. There has to be a period of real remorse. Now, how long does that have to go on? That really depends on the situation. It usually doesn't happen in just one conversation. It usually has to happen. So let's say you have one conversation where there's deep remorse being expressed. That helps, right? But then maybe a few weeks later, if it's still in the acute phase, you want to talk about it again and you're expressing pain again. Your spouse really needs to be able to tap into that remorse again, to be able to hold space for pain and to sit with the aftermath as a way to heal it. It's not punishing, and it's not like carte blanche for the betrayed spouse to have unbridled self-expression where it becomes verbally abusive. Like, that's not justified. And there are certain ways to express these things, but there still needs to be ongoing and repetitive acknowledgement of, yeah, this is still a thing. Yeah, you're still living with this. And I feel remorse for how that's still impacting you. So that takes a while. That's the number one thing that needs to happen, okay? Then the other thing you really have to have is the truth of what happened. And the biggest pitfall that happens with this is that spouses, the betrayer, the spouse that cheated, will often sugarcoat it or withhold certain pieces of information because they're mortified and they're so afraid of hurting you, right? That they'll tell you just a little bit of it. And then you find out later there was something else that they didn't tell you. And then that just opens up the betrayal again. And then it's like you can't heal if you don't know that they're actually still telling you what happened. I worked with a couple once where it was like layers and layers of new information that was coming out. And every time she thought she had the full story, it turned out that she didn't, and there was more. And it wasn't just more instances of the same thing. It was like more qualitatively very different things that really did make a difference in the picture. So there has to be the truth of what happened, no withholding, no like doling it out incrementally. If that means you have to take time to think about, if you're, let's say you're listening to this call right now and you are the one that is the cheating spouse, or you're trying to repair or come back from that, it's okay to take time to say, I need to think about how I'm going to tell this to you. But you don't want to just quickly blurt it out and then withhold, because you will pay for it later and it will damage the healing process. So that's a really big part of it. Now, the other thing I want to say is when you're talking about the truth of what happened in infidelity, there are 2 types of information that is helpful. Like, there's the investigative type of questioning, and then there's the detective kind of questioning. And Esther Perel talks about this, and I'm going to get into that in just a minute. But I just want to say real briefly for now that knowing the truth of what happened needs to be in the investigative category. So just the facts, the bare bones facts, not getting into all of the details that don't really matter, right? We're talking about instances, but there are certain details you may not need to know. So when I talk about truth of what happened, it's not the kind of truth that's going to torture you. It's the kind of truth that's going to give you clarity on what is real, the realness of what actually happened, so that you have something to explore, in looking at the meaning of it, what led to it, what was underneath it, and how to process it. But you can't process something if you don't know what it is. So the other thing that you have to have is recognition, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize. This is just from therapy models. You do have to have like two separate categories of healing. And I think most people think that there's just like an acute phase of healing, that you get it out, it takes a few weeks, and then you're done. But there's actually an acute phase of healing, and then there's a long-term phase of healing, which is really the meaning-making phase. That can take years, not constantly, of course, but periodically for a period of a couple of years, you can be in that phase of rebuilding trust for the long term in terms of really unpacking the meaning and growing from unraveling that experience. Because as you get distance from the experience, you have greater insight. So the first phase, the acute phase, is when the wound is still fresh and the betrayed partner is still extremely raw and insecure and extremely emotional and hurt. Emotions might be all over the place. They're still like, how could this happen? Oh my God. And they're like reliving the knowing of it repeatedly. Like they might have found out on Tuesday and then they're acting on Friday like they just found out for the first time on Friday. That's the acute phase, right? There's still that raw roller coaster of emotions. What needs to happen in the acute phase is a lot of reassurance. That's what's going to build trust, is really seeing that your spouse, the betrayer, is actually going to take accountability for the reassurance piece. They're going to take accountability for holding space and acknowledging like this is normal, right? It is upsetting, and I'm here with you, and I'm accountable for it. And I'm going to reassure you that I don't want to be with this other person. I'm ending that relationship. I want to work on this with you. And I'm assuming that if you're listening to this talk, you're in a situation where this was, something that happened in the past and you're trying to move past it, and that your spouse is on board with that. If your spouse is still seeing the affair partner, that's a whole different ballgame. And I don't think you can heal from that in that case. So I just want to be clear about that. This is really, getting reassurance, knowing that this is going to be, I'm cutting contact. I'm not going to work with this person anymore. I'm deleting them from my phone. I'm shutting down my Facebook account. You're the one I want to be with. Whatever reassurance it takes, that's what has to happen in that first acute phase. The reassurance too is also just really more about, how do I know it's not going to happen again? And knowing the answer to that is going to help the hurt spouse really understand or get a sense of, okay, this spouse that cheated on me is actually, this spouse that I'm repairing with is a different person than the person that betrayed me. Like, I understand that, this was behavior that came, but this is not who this person is. And getting in touch with the reassurance around what's going to be different going forward, so that, the hurt person can move on. Obviously, access and total transparency during this phase. This is the place where it's okay and fair game to say, all right, I want to be able to see or have access to your phone. I want to be able to have your passwords for a period of time. Now, you shouldn't be able to raid, boundaries. There still has to be some boundaries, but it's really about that the betraying spouse is going to be open to that and offering that and saying, I'm willing to do that. I'm agreeing to do that, because that's part of telling the truth, and that's part of repairing the situation. It's part of reassuring you, and it's the very beginning process of rebuilding trust. The other thing too is it's important to, as I mentioned, you have to normalize all the feelings and emotions, and just no judgment on any of it. It's all fair game. And what's also normal is that you're going to have very different agendas, and that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean that you can't heal and rebuild together as a team, even though you have different agendas. So for example, the spouse that betrayed is going to want to forget it. They're going to want to shove it under the rug. They're going to want to talk about it once or twice, and then that's it. Let's move on. It's over. Okay. We're going to go back to how we were or whatever. And the betrayed spouse is going to want to keep talking about it. And there's almost always a huge disconnect in that agenda. And that's not a bad thing. And so it's important to just call that out too and say, we're going to want different things, but we're going to have to meet each other halfway, and we're going to have to find a balance. And if the hurt partner is really obsessing and it's gotten really bad, where it's like super trauma-based reactions, heart palpitations, panic attacks, nonstop ruminating and feeling very destabilized, where functioning is being impaired at work or at home or parenting, then I highly recommend EMDR for handling these symptoms, because EMDR is actually a trauma modality that is, it doesn't require a lot of talking. It's not talk-based therapy. It really just goes right into the brain. It draws from split brain research and allows you to integrate both hemispheres of the brain at the same time to integrate what happened from a whole brain state, so that you're not like just, you know, spinning in your brain all the time. So look up EMDR. That's a separate topic I can talk about another time. But if you're able to manage it, you know, without medication or without EMDR, you know, you want to just recognize that at some point you're gonna look for moving into the second phase. That would be a sign that you're moving through it in a healthy way. Now, the second phase, like I said, it takes longer. It may take years, but this is really just getting a deeper understanding, not of what happened, like physically or logistically or when and where and all that stuff, but the meaning of what happened. You know, what did it mean to the betraying spouse, and what did it do to the hurt partner? What was underneath it? And so this is where you look for the investigative questions, you know, like meanings and motives. And when I talk about this different kind of questions, this is from Esther Perel's State of Affairs. She talks about questions, not where were you, what did you do, how often did you do it, how did you do it, was she better than me, all of those kinds of questions. Those are detective questions. Those are not helpful. Rather, you want to ask, you know, really, what was it about? Did you think of me while it was happening? Did you hope that it would continue or secretly hope that it would end? Did you want to get caught? Did you discover new parts of yourself in this relationship? Why did you feel that you couldn't express that to me? Really unpacking the meaning of what that was. And then also, of course, what the impact and the meaning was to the betrayed person as well. And having a real open dialogue, like you're on the same team together. That's a really big part of the second phase. And the other thing I want to mention, and this is, well, actually two more things that are really important to remember in rebuilding trust and kind of getting over the hump, is knowing that at a certain point, trust still is going to be a relationship with the unknown. It's not having to know everything. It's not saying I have to have access to your phone all the time so then I can trust you, because trust means being comfortable with not knowing everything. So at a certain point, you do just have to decide to trust again. Trust is not knowing. And but the only way that that can happen is if you know what's going to be different going forward, because you can't really let go of something that's still happening, right? So once things are different and you've got some new ground rules, which is the final thing I wanted to mention, you really want to have a shared understanding of what the new ground rules are with regards to relationships outside the marriage, relationships with the opposite sex, what's considered unfaithful for you. Is it even talking to someone? Is it texting? Is it flirting? Like, what's the line, right? But once you have that and you're operating from those assumptions and you've done some healing from the acute phase, you do want to get to a place where you recognize, I am going to have to just take that leap of faith again, because that's what trust is. And you have enough of a foundation, if you've done these things correctly, what I just talked about, where you can get to that place where you can say, all right, I don't have to know. I know enough about the fact that this person that I'm with is not the same person anymore. They understand what happened. They understand why it happened. They've taken precautions to preventing it again. They don't even want that anymore. Like, there's enough different that you understand it's not going to happen again. So that is the goal. Ultimately, the goal is not to just survive this and get through another day of not fighting about it, or just to live with the insecurity and the constant fear and just the resentment that kind of like blocks love. The goal is to really end up with a relationship that is transformed in a positive way through the crisis of infidelity or other betrayal. And that happens all the time. I see it happen all the time. So if you're stuck, you know, please know that there is hope. It just is probably that you haven't had what it is that I talked about properly. And if it's something that you're really wanting to do, if you feel like you've tried it and it's not working, or you feel like your spouse is not meeting you halfway and you're not sure how to approach that, but you're just really looking for a step-by-step process to rebuilding trust in your marriage so that you can really have the marriage that you want for the rest of your life. This is the hardest thing, but it's like, if you're fighting the good fight if you're even listening to this call right now. If you're still listening to me right now, you're fighting the good fight. You're in the trenches right now, and it's not even worth it if you don't get to the other side. But there is the other side. So if you want to get there, I invite you to book a call with me, or I invite you to listen to my webinar, which I will post below. But if you book a call with me or one of my coaches, we'll talk to you. We'll find out a little bit about what your dynamics are, what phase you're in, what phase you should be in, what's missing, which components are missing, how to set that up for you, and really to help heal so you can have a great marriage for the rest of your life, if that's what you want. And that's monikahoyt.com/talk. monikahoyt.com/talk if you want to book a call with me. And if you have any questions whatsoever, please don't hesitate. I will go through. I won't be taking live questions right now, but I will be going through any questions that you put in the comments below. I and my coaches will. And then with that, I will say thanks for joining today. I look forward to seeing you next time. We'll be back on Thursday.